Over these last weeks, or maybe it's even months, the question's been asked, how do we know when we've arrived at that state where the three levels of life, existence, mind, have merged to bring about that which is called Satchit Ananda, or existence, knowledge, and bliss, or undifferentiated awareness. Well, maybe over these last months, there's the possibility that we've established that there are certain indicators. One, that we find ourselves almost perpetually in a state of presence. There's an absence of dialogue, what ifs, shoulds, maybes, buts. There's an absence of reaction, even though there's responses. And over these last days, with the stories that have been told, perhaps it's been established that also there's no longer life as a mirror. Life is no longer reflecting to us the perceptions of a self, the absence of a mirror. But what else could there be? And let's see what this story, already told overseas, will evoke for us, to see if we can establish for ourselves, yes, indeed, I do abide in this state called Satchitananda. And only then can we move on. There's a story about a warrior king whose name was Paramitra. Now, Paramitra was an insatiable conqueror. He never ventured forth into the world without being accompanied by an entourage of 1,000 soldiers. He was very covetous. But there was an occasion when he was out abroad, and after a prolonged battle, found himself in a dense forest. But as he traversed deeper into the forest, suddenly he found himself stepping into a place where suddenly he began to feel the cares and woes of life falling away from him. Peace began to descend on his being. And as he ventured deeper, he found himself in a clearing. And as he looked around, the great trees that were standing there, under each was an ascetic in deep, deep meditation. Lions were lying down with lambs, wolves with tigers. The trees were filled to abundance with fruit. And Paramitra realized that he'd entered the realm of the great saint Sashitha, that one who had attained a state when all the forces of nature worked for him to bring about a harmony unknown to most. And as his gaze moved around, he saw the saint sitting under a great oak tree in deep, deep, tranquil samadhi. But, as is the way with such beings, Sashitha was aware of the presence of the king, and his eyes opened, and he rose from his meditative pose to greet him and welcome him. And after the usual salutations, Sashitha invited the king to partake of the abundance that was there, and he fed him with his own hands the mangoes, bananas, and other delicacies that had come from this place. But time passed, and it was time for Paramitra to return to his soldiers and return to his palace. But just as he was about to take his leave, Sashitha said to the king, "Invite your army in. They must be tired and hungry." "Oh," said Paramitra, "no, they're 1,000 strong. How can you feed an army of 1,000 men?" "No, no, no," said Sashitha, "bring them in." And so the army was welcomed into this compound. And just then, to the very great surprise and awe of the king, Sashitha spoke quietly the words, "Subhuti, Subhuti, come." And as the king watched, the atoms beside the saint began to dance and form themselves into the most magnificent cow. Her great horns rising high, her udder filled to overflowing, her silken skin shining and glistening in the evening light, and her soft eyes luminous, gazing out at the throng. And the saint said, "Subhuti, we have guests who are tired and hungry. Provide for them." And as the king watched in awe, the accoutrements of the necessities for ablution were given to each soldier, and a feast that each of their hearts would desire. As the king himself partook of this feast, a great envy and covetousness arose in his heart. He wanted that cow. So, after the feasting, the king said to the saint, "You're a saint. Your needs are simple. But I'm a king with great kingdoms to take care of, many mouths to feed. Give me or sell me this cow." And the saint said, "You don't understand. This cow comes from the purity of the hearts of those who have attained a state. She cannot be given away. She cannot be sold." The king said, "I'll give you 1,000 cows and bags of gold." The saint said, "You don't understand. This cow is closer to me than my heart, my lungs, my skin. Everything that I have is part of me. She cannot be given nor sold." So the king, this envy rising in him, said to his soldiers, "Take her!" But as they advanced and tried to grab Subhuti, she began to disappear. The atoms into which she'd been formed began to disperse, and she was no longer there. The king was so angry, his anger turned toward the great rishi, the saint, and so he said to the soldiers, "Kill him!" But as the soldiers advanced, a flame emanated from the mouth of the saint, and in a second the soldiers were reduced to ashes. The king was beside himself, but as he left the compound, he vowed that he would return and take revenge on Sashitha. When Paramitra returned to his palace, his heart could not rest. He paced back and forward with the anger and the need for revenge eating at his heart. So he gave his kingdoms to his son, and he went off to find the greatest sorcerers in the land, who had direct communion with the gods of the forces of nature, to learn from them the weapons that would be needed to wreak his revenge on the saint. He spent many years practicing the rituals, learning the ways of magic and the occult. And finally, when he believed he was armed with all that was needed, he set out for the place where the saint lived. When he entered the compound of the saint, immediately he sent a flame directed at the thatched hut in which the saint lived, and it burst and went up in fire. But as the fire abated, out of the ruins and the ashes which were forming, the saint emerged, his loincloth charred, his hair still singed. He was carrying a wooden staff. Now, Paramitra was not pleased that his weapon had been unsuccessful, but he did have an armory of others. And as the great saint stood unperturbed, holding his wooden staff, the king proceeded to throw at him the weapons given to him after his years of practices. But as the weapons reached the great saint, the staff which he held in his hand seemed to glimmer and deflected all those things which were sent at him. In fact, not only were they deflected, but they became particles themselves and emerged and merged back into the ethers. The king Paramitra had only one weapon left, a poisoned arrow. And he sent this flying towards the staff of the great saint. But as the arrow reached the staff, it seemed to open up into a great void, a great vastness which contained all the universes. And when the arrow entered in, it disappeared into those ethers containing all. The king was beside himself with anger and frustration. But Sashitha said to the king, "You have disturbed my peace, so now I'm going to kill you." And he raised his staff. But just as he did so, all of the ascetic monks sitting under their trees around the compound in unison said, "Sashitha, Sashitha, don't forget who you are. Do not give anger to anger." So Sashitha took his staff and placing it and aligning it in the front of his body, he returned to his tranquil state of serenity, peaceful vastness. And he said to the king, "Go. May the anger that burns within you be the fire that drives you to enlightenment." The king, also again feeling in him that covetousness, that envy, "I want that staff," was powerless. And as he turned and went off, he remembered what the saint had said, "Everything I have is a part of me." And the king realized that he could not take this staff. He would have to earn it as the cow through a state of purity. So the question that arises for the moment from this story, relative to this question, how do we know when we've arrived at that state of unity, where all the levels of life have merged, and we live in a state of presence, absence of doubt and dialogue, absence of reaction, and no longer looking on life as a mirror, a reflection of a self. What is this staff? What does it represent for us? Aligned at the front of our body to maintain a state of tranquility, serenity, unity, peace, universality. What is this staff that we hold? Thank you, thank you.